how would you quantify objectively, how would you measure your impact?
As it relates to life in general, or the ministry side of things, or
I think I'm most interested in the ministry, but I guess we could do like a combination of both.
Yeah, I think our primary purpose is to glorify God. That's what it is for me, and being in tune with Him. And I think He kind of lays a path out for us if we'll look for it. And in my case, in my wife's case, it led us, from the States to a foreign land. And I'm not sure what the question was. I actually
just how do you measure impact?
Weeds. Yeah, impact. And so in my case, we went to Russia. We were obedient. I would say that's a whole story in itself about how the door opened for us to go to Russia, because it wasn't
Tell us the story.
Well, if you want to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it wasn't just a simple like, hey, babe.
No, this is a weird one.
Russia.
I heard about Russia, and I think it'd be a great idea.
It was almost the opposite. But honestly, I was very involved in real estate. I had rental property. I was doing development work. I had partners. And we were going down paths that, you don't just put a lot in the ground and sell it the next day and be out of it in 30 days. This was like a year or two commitment. And so I had that stuff going on. And even though my wife and I both agreed, hey, let's figure out how to put this on hold and pursue missions, I thought, wow, this isn't going to happen very quickly. So I said, okay, well, we'll just see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's the route we're going to go. Well, one night my wife says, look, we've been talking about this and we've made this commitment. We need to pray for specific direction. Pray for specific direction. And so we did. It was a pretty brief prayer. I remember, it's like it was yesterday. Lord, you feel like you're calling us this way. If it's your will, you need to show us how and when and all that. As soon as I said amen, the phone rang.
No.
I'm serious. And I got 4 little kids. They were 7, 8, 6, and 5 at the time. I said, all right, honey, you take the call. I'll take the kids upstairs and put them into bed. And couldn't have been written any funnier. But so I take them upstairs, put them in bed. That's usually takes a few minutes getting them all down and in bed to stay. Came down the stairs and my wife says, we just got our answer. Seriously. I said, what? And then she told me that a friend of mine from Michigan had called. And he called because his dad was in Russia at the time. This would have been 1991 or 2. Looking up some old relatives because the doors were open. And he felt like, he looked around and said, there's no churches over here. And he had remembered that his son, my friend, had told him about us going someplace, going to put our name in the hat and go someplace on a volunteer mission basis. And he thought, I'm going to call Gary and tell Gary to call that to his friends and find out if they'd have any interest at all in coming to Russia. So that's literally how the door opened for us to go. We didn't know at the time whether we could make that happen or not, but we began to pursue that direction. Next thing we know, our church had a volunteer mission program, and they said, hey, would you guys consider going to Russia? Where we said we felt called, and the door was opening, go and be pioneer missionaries, just kind of look around, get established there and see if it might be a possible place to plant a church or two.
Wow.
So we went. Took about a year to get stuff sold. We sold our home at auction in Cedarville, which was an interesting experience. A guy came to our auction to buy our piano, doctor in the area. He ended up buying our house.
What?
Yeah. Well, that's not the end of the story. So and then he came to me and says, I'm buying your house and stuff. This is exciting, but I don't need it right away. Do you want to rent it? I said, oh yeah, we'd like to rent it until we get ready to go to Russia, which was going to be 7 or 8 or 9 months later, maybe a little bit more than that. Great. I'd like that. So we continued to rent our house. And then he came to us in about the 10th month or whatever it was and said, my wife and I, we're not going to move into the house. Do you care if we put it on the market? I said, oh, it's your house. And sure, we'll accommodate that. So he allowed us to rent the house back from him while we're getting prepared to go to Russia. So I was able to take my assets and work those around. And then he ended up putting the house on the market. The first person that looked at it bought it. It was a win-win. He made a little gain on it. We had what we needed, and we're off to Russia. We went.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
Crazy days.
I was going to ask you, like, that call, like, not the call, I just meant, like, in general, the call of that feeling. Like, was it a feeling, intuition, your wife? But it sounds like it was a little bit of all of that, and then the prayer, and then the timing of everything, just like you knew that it was from God. Is that right?
Yeah. You know, when I was 12 or 13, it became clear to me that God was calling me to, like, missions or ministry. I fought that call. The only thing I thought of was preaching, and I couldn't be a preacher because I don't want to do a wedding, I don't want to do a funeral, and the idea of going into a hospital and calling on somebody, the smell of a hospital would bring me down to my knees. I couldn't even go into a hospital. So I would say, I'd push that aside. I literally fought those feelings and that understanding of what God was calling me to. So I pushed it aside. I went to a liberal arts school in Kankakee, Illinois, fighting that call. Left a business degree, thinking, that's not for me. Came back to Fort Wayne, then I had a uncle who was a prophet at Fort Wayne Bible and kind of encouraged me. Well, you need a degree, yeah. So studied Christian education over there. But I said, but I'm really going to be a good Christian businessman, successful businessman, and went that direction. But it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't enough. And my wife agreed from almost the day I met her that, she felt called to missions or ministry. And so she was always on me to really pursue what we've been called to do from the moment we got married or before. And so that was the background that led me. Wasn't an audible voice, but it was something I felt and sensed in my heart. Needed to do.
So that was 31 years ago that you made that decision.
It was 1992.
Oh, I thought you said 3.
Three is when we went.
All right, 32
is when yes.
32 years ago, you got the call, which would have made you 38 years old.
Yes.
Do you feel like you became more spiritual as you aged?
Wow. I think there's growth and maturity on that side. I feel like I'm doing what God's called me to do now, which involves housing and helping people. A lot of first-time home buyers into housing, affordable housing. But there's growth. There's maturity and spiritual growth. I think if we're living the way we're called to live, reading the Word, et cetera, there's going to be growth. That seed planted in my heart's going to grow. And so the answer is, and at 70 years old, I'm hopefully a little wiser as well.
Do you then feel like a peace whenever you're feeling like you're in that work? Because what I've thought a lot about, because I've thought about very similar things, honestly, where I'm like, okay, what am I called to do? What is going to be the biggest contribution to the kingdom? Like, what's going to be forever? Because obviously, like, business, money, houses, all that stuff, like, it doesn't really matter because it's all going to go away, right? It's going
to go away.
Yeah, so we know that. But then there is some things that last forever. And so I believe the impact that we have on, like, the employees, the different people around us, how we treat the sellers, like, all of that stuff can last forever. And so then for me, it's not about necessarily what you choose to do, but who you are while you do it. And so that's kind of been my reasoning, and then just still being aware of, like, this is more shaping me into the person that I need to become for whatever's next that God has for me. But, like, I guess, do you feel peace, or do you feel it's more about who you are while you're doing it? Or, like, how do you know when you're in the will, or, like, you're doing the best contribution? Or do you look at it for, like, an ROI? Like, is this going to impact God's kingdom the most, or is there something else I could do this more? Like, how do you kind of view and analyze all of these different thoughts?
I think you have to stay open to it, because I really believe that God calls people to in certain directions. Seems like sometimes very clearly, and other times you say, hey, I'm good at this, I like to do this, and then sitting back and saying, how can I do this, the things I like to do, and impact the kingdom and do it for the glory of God. Because I believe that's our primary purpose, and we oftentimes miss it. 60% of Americans, if you go out on the street and stick a microphone in people's face and say, why are you here? They can't answer that question. Americans, what is life purpose? Well, I don't know. Be a good person. They really struggle with that. When I think that's a very important question to ask and pursue is, what is life purpose? Why am I here? What can I do to, in my case, with Christian principles, what can I do to be a good Christian and to encourage other people to do the same thing?